the decision was easier in Las Vegas because it became obvious as the season unfolded that the Pete Carroll experiment was not sustainable. And Devin, I think the biggest problem there, and that was the other one that we fully anticipated, the biggest problem there, they completely misevaluated what they were going to be in 2025. I think everybody in the organization was under the delusion that the Raiders were going to be competitive, which is what prompted them to target a veteran quarterback. Plug him in, let's go, we're ready to go. Which prompted them, I believe, to use a top 10 pick on a running back. Plug him in, let's go, we're ready to go. They weren't ready to go. They had so many flaws on the roster, and it showed week after week. And but for the collapse of the Jets, because I think I'm going to do the power rankings right after we're done. The Jets, congratulations, you're number 32, because the last 5 weeks for the Jets were as bad as any 5 weeks I've ever seen from any team. But for that, the Raiders are the worst team in the NFL. And Carroll had to go because I think Carroll was the guy, because that's his personality, rah, be positive, let's be positive, glass half full. Well, in Las Vegas, the glass was 95% empty and 5% full, and he focused on the 5% full, and it put the team in a worse position now than it was a year ago. So they're the next ones that are going to be looking for someone to come in and make things better than they've been since 2002, when they went to the Super Bowl. They've been to the playoffs twice in 23 years since then with no postseason wins. They're going to need somebody to turn that around.
I think for them, the hard thing is the last time they were in the playoffs when they decided to make these changes. They had John Gruden. The Gruden experiment didn't work out. And Biati, I'm messing his last name up, the special teams coach, took over.
Hey, you got the in-house Italian. Bisaccia.
He was doing a good job. The players, they loved him. They wanted him to stay. But like you said, the business of the NFL, it wasn't a name that mattered enough to stay as the head coach. It didn't feel good enough for them to say, hey, this guy took over a bad situation where we go with Gruden, these emails come out, he has to withstand that, and this team still makes it to play in the playoffs. And they hire Josh McDaniels, who comes in. That doesn't work out at all. Again, they have a guy that's on the staff, Antonio Pierce, takes over. They get some camaraderie. They build a little bit. Not that the team was fantastic, but it was enough. And they say, hey, we're not going to make this mistake again. We're going to stick. Antonio Pierce, you're going to stay as head coach. They give him 1 year, and then they move on from Antonio Pierce. And like you said, the thing is, in the business of football, when you decide 1 year that you're going to let a guy go, you say, hey, we were in a bad situation. We decided to go with Antonio Pierce. We know our situation isn't perfect, but we've identified this guy to take us on. Now, he goes, and obviously he doesn't go in and win right away, and I know it happens sometimes. We've seen it this year, but he doesn't win. So when you get rid of that guy after 1 year, it's because you felt like you were so much better than how he performed. And now you say, we gotta make the step to not just be bad because we have a good football team. And then Pete Carroll walks into a situation where you now have a good football team. After all that has happened, you got rid of the good football team that went to the playoffs. And this is what you said. We're going to be way better than that. And now Pete Carroll, he didn't really have a chance. Like, it was all good. This is a time of year when you move on from guys and everything's so positive. But the truth is, the Raiders are still trying to build something. And I thought moving on from Antonio Pierce, I didn't think that was the greatest decision last year after you give a guy 1 year to kind of prove what he could do. And you move on, and now you're in a worse situation. It just sucks. And, again, they have the first pick, so this is going to be an attractive job, I think, for anybody to take over. But the truth is, like, they have to now manage some of the guys that they have on their roster, the Brock Bowers, the Max Crosby, some of these guys who are really good players. They're going to have to manage how much do they want to stay in Vegas. Like, are they fully bought into what's going to happen next? Because, like, that's the reality of the situation. When you start to become a team where it's never good, some of those guys you even find in the draft or some of those free agents, whatever, that end up making it home, they start to look and say, all right, how do I want my career to go? Do I want to stay here? Yes, it'll be great. Maybe I'll be a Hall of Famer. Or do I want to be a part of something where we win, we go to the playoffs, we compete, we contend? I think they're going to start to fall into the same thing we just talked about the Cleveland Browns. Like, they got to get some good things about them where it's not like, hey, man, we're going to have fun. We're going to Vegas. We're playing the Raiders. We're going to win, but at least we get to be in Vegas for a few days. Like, you don't want your organization to turn into that.
And by the way, Gary pointed out that if Ravens owner Steve Bisciotti would desire to make a coaching change and hire Rich Bisaccia, between you and Chris, we'd have to work on the proper pronunciation of the Italian last names. But that would become a necessity at that point if Bisciotti hires Bisaccia. Not Biscotti hiring or whatever you said. I don't even know what you said. It wasn't even close. It was Sims level.
But you knew where I was going.
It was even worse than Sims level. But I knew where you were going. But you're right. Look, special teams coordinators don't get serious consideration to be head coaches because owners believe they can't sell that to the people who have to decide, am I going to renew my season tickets? Am I going to be excited about this hire? Am I going to be inspired by this hire? And people in the business know, hey, special teams coordinators have already mastered the skill of communicating with guys on both sides of the ball. They've got their finger on the pulse of the team. They're dealing with offense and defense all the time. They're speaking a language that is common to both sides of the ball. It's an easier transition to have to stand up in front of the room and communicate with the whole locker room. You're not just an expert in offense who ignores defense or in defense who ignores offense. You're already pre-positioned to run a whole team, but for whatever reason, it doesn't work. Hey, with Bisaccia, they almost beat the Bengals in the wild card round, the year the Bengals almost beat the Rams in the Super Bowl. But Bisaccia didn't get serious consideration. Josh McDaniels became the coach, and that didn't work out. And, Devin, I think that if McDaniels hadn't already been the coach of the Raiders, and if it hadn't flamed out the way it did, he'd be the top candidate there. Because I think Tom Brady, and the statement they issued yesterday, Tom, you can run, but you can't hide. They're putting you on notice. It's no longer, Tom Brady's just kind of around. It's going to be John Spytek, the GM, working closely with Tom Brady. That was the statement, working closely with Tom Brady in hiring the next coach. And look at what's happened with Patriot Way DNA in New England this year with Vrabel. Even though Vrabel never coached with Belichick, he played for Belichick. They're closely aligned, or at least they were until, Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick are at odds, and Vrabel's got to stick with the guy that pays his, salary. But you've got Vrabel and McDaniels there, and it's working really well. That's why, we wrote about it over the weekend, and you and I talked about it on Sunday, and we communicated about it over the weekend. And right now, DraftKings has Brian Flores as the plus 175 favorite to be the next coach of the Raiders. It just makes sense. If Brady's going to be making the hire, why wouldn't he revert to what he knows? Why wouldn't he want people who can come in and recreate what worked in New England? What worked in Seattle didn't work in Las Vegas. Sorry, Pete Carroll. And nothing else has been working for the Raiders lately. And if Brady's going to be expected to make that decision, why wouldn't he want coaches he's familiar with? I just think it makes a ton of sense. Too much sense, in fact. So much sense that it probably won't happen. But this idea of a Brian Flores, Brian Daboll combination in Las Vegas, which, if Bill Belichick texts the wrong Brian this time around, it won't matter because it's still both of them going to the same place. If that would happen, that wouldn't be surprising at all if Brady's going to be calling the shots, because who else does Brady know well enough to entrust the team to?
And I think Brady gets linked to New England, rightfully so, but Brady's a unique situation because he's experienced 20 years of Bill Belichick, but then he goes to Tampa and he got to see what the non-Bill Belichick kind of coaching style under Bruce Arians, under Todd Bowles. So, he's lived in that world of, hey, we're not patting you on the back. We're always going to tell you what you did wrong. He lived in that world, but he also lived in a more upbeat, not as negative kind of style. So, he got to, as he's making these decisions, he got to feel that, right? Pete Carroll was the more positive guy. So I do think there's something to Tom saying, all right, as we all met, I bought in. I kind of went with the positive, hey, we're going to do this. I think there is a world where he comes back and he says, hey, man, we did that. We tried that. Brian Flores is a guy that's going to come in if something's wrong, if a guy's not playing to his level, if something's not going right in the front office or what, like Flo is he's going to come in and he's going to present it. He's going to say it directly to you. It's going to be in your face. Brian Daboll's a guy that, whatever we think of his time in the Giants, he was the guy that, hey, Drake May, I'm telling you, if we can get up to number 3, if we can get Drake May, that was kind of seen in Hard Knocks. With everything that went wrong in Hard Knocks, it surely felt like Brian Daboll loved Drake May. We're watching Drake May. He was the guy that said, hey, Jackson Dart, let's go get Jackson Dart. I'm telling you, Jackson Dart's the guy. So I think there is something to it. Hey, if you're going to get the number 1 pick and you're going to bring a guy in who's worked with Josh Allen to help develop Josh Allen. He helped with Daniel Jones in that first year with Daniel Jones. He goes and gets Jackson Dart. He fell in love with Drake May. It seems that, hey, this guy might know a little something about quarterbacks. So whether they decide to get a quarterback with number 1 or they trade back because he loves another quarterback, you could see it as a pairing. The unique thing is Brian Daboll's a little bit like Flo, very direct. So they would have to develop a really good working relationship. They work together in New England. They've had that time together, but they're two guys that I think in a lot of situations they could be very similar. So sometimes that's great. You don't know. That would be something that they would have to, I think, really work on and make sure that is lock and step like we see with Vrabel and McDaniel so far in New England. But I could definitely see Brady saying, hey, I'm going back to my roots in this situation. Let's get a guy in here that I know will run things a certain way that I've seen work over 2 decades and 6 Super Bowls.
And you make a great point about the contrast that Brady personally experienced after his time in New England because, look, I know they engineered it to appear to be Bruce Arians choosing to retire in late March. That's one version of what happened. The other version is Tom Brady retired and then unretired, and the understanding was when he unretires, Bruce Arians isn't going to be the head coach, and that's how Todd Bowles became the head coach. But the rah-rah, positive, upbeat thing with an edge, there's a little edge there. Arians had a little edge, but it's far different from the Belichick constantly pointing out the negatives, constantly challenging, constantly trying to get more out of you by tearing you down in a meeting room. So when you get to the field, it's a relief that you don't have to listen to Belichick anymore. That approach clearly paid dividends for all the time that Belichick and Brady were together in New England. And I think the other side of it, too, one of the things we started to pick up as the season unfolded, we saw Brady in the coaching box for the Week 2 Monday night game against the Chargers. Then we started to hear that he talks to Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly. And my guess is those guys probably got sick of hearing from Tom Brady because Tom Brady may have been telling them to do things a certain way based upon his own experience with Bill Belichick. Well, that won't be an issue if Tom Brady's trying to speak the same language as Brian Flores and Brian Daboll. They're going to know what Tom Brady's talking about because they lived it too. And, it occurred to me, maybe the better arrangement is Daboll as the head coach and Flores as the defensive coordinator because he's available, not technically yet, because the contracts last at some point beyond the final game. But let's face it, his job in Minnesota is over now. Whether it's the Cowboys, whether it's the Raiders, whether it's anybody else, he's in play to be a defensive coordinator elsewhere. Maybe Daboll, the head coach, Flores, the defensive coordinator. One way or the other, the rumor that's going around, Flores coach, Daboll offensive coordinator, and who else is Tom Brady going to turn to? And now that he's in that release, I was surprised when I saw it because I think Brady's been trying to stake out this territory, Devin, where if it ever goes well, hey, just win, baby. If it doesn't, I'm sorry, I work for Fox. Now he's getting pulled into it. And I think he realizes, how can you not realize that at some point people are going to say, hey, Tom, I thought you were involved in this. Oh, no, sorry, I own this thing here and this thing there. And, I'm selling gloves and watches. I don't really work for the Raiders. Baloney. He's in with the Raiders. And now there's no mistaking it because he's in that press release as the guy who's going to work with John Spytek to find the next coach. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.